Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another very interesting talk. I have the honor to introduce to you today Professor Tom Lenaerts, who will give his take on which direction should AI take to become more pro-social and why this is even necessary. I know Tom very well since he's also been my PhD promoter. So to keep it brief, Tom is a full professor at the ULB and an associate professor at the VUB. He's also the director of the Inter-University Institute of Bioinformatics in Brussels and the co-head of the machine learning group at ULB. Tom is a very prolific and interdisciplinary researcher, and his research addresses important questions in bioinformatics, game theory, experimental economics, and pro-social artificial intelligence. So Tom, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Elias, for this nice introduction. Let me share my screen. So this should be visible now for everybody. So thanks a lot for this nice introduction, Elias. And I would first of all like to take the opportunity to congratulate Nathaniel for the excellent organization of this very exciting week. It's been interesting to follow, and a lot of interesting points have been made. And I'm gonna contribute my 5 cents to this entire discussion here by introducing some work that we've been doing in my group at the ULB and VUB on a topic called pro-social AI. It's a topic which is also directly linked to this new institute we are starting in Brussels on AI for common good. Okay, so let's get started. So maybe before I go into the AI part of things, I should explain to you what I mean by pro-social and pro-self. And these are concepts which are coming actually from psychology, where there's this area called social, or this framework called social value orientation, that is used to explain to people or to identify in people what their attitude is towards the sharing or distribution of resources. And like the picture you see here on the screen, imagine you're entering the coffee room of your company or university or whatever, and there's all these boxes of donuts there. What is your attitude towards eating from those donuts? Are you going to first get your friends and then everybody can join in to enjoy these delicious donuts? Or are you going to first look and pick out the best ones, put them aside for you, and then go get them? Or what are you actually doing? And this attitude can be quantified. And there is this nice work by Murphy and colleagues that actually uses an approach to identify how you relate your own gains in function to the other people's gains. So what is important for yourself and how you give importance to others. And this is done by this figure on the right, where you see that by comparing how much you care about yourself and about others, you're somewhere on this circular diagram that represents this social value orientation. You see already 4 groups mentioned there. You have altruistic attitudes, you have cooperative attitudes, you have individualistic attitudes, or you have competitive attitudes. And there's also like a 5th one, which is equality seeking, which is about fairness. So these altruistic ones are people with an attitude to first try to share with others. So they will first make sure others get a lot out of the resource before they actually think about themselves. If you go then further, cooperative ones are more like team players. They want the team to be good and everybody getting something out of this this resource. And of course, equality seeking means that they're very much concerned with fairness, that everybody gets an equal share. There's nobody gets more or less than anybody else. And if you go further on this circle, this moves into individualistic, where people have the attitude to actually think more first about themselves. There might still be interest in helping others, but it's mostly about themselves in the first place. And this can go into the negative, where you really are insisting on your own benefits coming from this kind of resource distribution. And then you would have, as furthest down, the competitive attitude, where you really want to win. So it's about getting the best and the most, and not so much about what the other ones are getting out of this kind of resource sharing. So this is what we call pro-social and pro-self. So pro-self is more the individualistic and competitive attitudes, whereas pro-social is more the altruistic and cooperative attitudes in this kind of spectrum. So how does this relate to AI? In order to understand how I see this, because it's a research concept, you need to go back a bit to the history of AI. And sadly, Luc did not have the time this morning to present everything about the history of AI. And I also have to be very brief and very generalistic about this history of AI. But what I'm showing here is that we have like two big classes in the history of AI, where one is called sometimes the strong, and the other one is sometimes called the weak AI. And the strong AI simply means that people in the beginning were thinking about building systems that think and act like humans. So the human was the reference in order to determine whether a system was intelligent, yes or no. Whereas in the weak AI, it was much more about rationality. It's more about can I actually achieve a rational outcome from the actions of my agents? So there seems to be an echo problem, Elias. Is this the case? No echo problem. Okay, I will continue then. So the point here is that the AI of today is actually this weak AI, which is not weak in a bad sense. It simply means that there's not concern about how it compares to humans, but how it compares to rational behavior. And so on the one hand, you have thinking rationally. So people are investigating formal laws of thought and put them in a computer and use them to build up reasoning systems inside these AI systems. On the other hand, you have systems that act rationally, like, for instance, this DeepMind breakthrough of AlphaZero, where they had a self-training system learning at the same time chess checker and Mahjong and Othello. Oh, sorry, Go. Sorry, to play actually this kind of games. But it's a system that actually tries to achieve these objectives in a rational way. It's even competitive in the sense that it tries to win against any opponent that actually will play with him that game. So essentially, rationality in AI at this moment in time is actually defined as a system that is maximally achieving some predefined set of goals. And this rationality assumption and how this actually works has been very, very successful. And I'll show you a few examples here on this screen, where you have systems optimally solving complex games. You have systems optimally acting in a complex environment like the self-driving cars. You have systems optimally answering questions or giving answers or giving questions to answers, like in the case of Watson. Or you have systems very, very well trained, very well designed to give you the content that you prefer, like is done by Netflix and Amazon, for instance. And all these systems are based on this rational agent paradigm that people who studied AI, who had an AI course during their lifetime, often got from this book by Russell and Norvig, AI: A Modern Approach. And in this book, the rational agent paradigm is shown as a system where the agent has sensors and actuators, and it senses signals from the environment, which it then compares to an internal model and updates this model based on the information it's getting, and it uses this updated model to think about the next actions to take to achieve its goal. And these actions can be many, so it needs to decide which one has the highest utility, which is the most useful to achieve that goal, and then you can execute that action inside the environment. So this is a system that actually achieves a predefined set of goals. And for me, this seems like a pro-self system, where it's about the individualistic goals of the system, often in competition with others to actually achieve something. And this is no problem as long as this system is under full control. And most systems that people actually are caring about is on the data side, which Luc also mentioned this morning. These are systems where you execute pattern detection, you try to find information that will allow you to make better decisions and take actions based on those decisions. But AI is not like that. AI is about autonomy. It's about creating systems that act and decide and act by themselves. So you can still imagine that there is a system, a person in the loop there. But the question then becomes, once there's only partial control, when does the person have to intervene? Probably I will intervene in different ways than you will intervene, right? Maybe based on information, the same information we get, we have different values, different norms. We might have different reasons to intervene when something goes wrong into this system. And it becomes, of course, worse when the human is no longer in the system, but is outside and just sees what's happening and cannot intervene, right? Are these systems then aligned with what we think is important, with what we think should be their behavior? And how can we actually make them aligned to these kind of things? And just a nice example to give, there was recently this movie on Netflix which is called the social dilemma. And it clearly showed that these algorithms goals might not be aligned with with the use that you actually make of that kind of system. And this was a very nice example in that context. And of course, the response of Europe and of many people is to actually go to governance. It is to say, okay, we need to define ethics, we need to define rules on how these things actually are going to be managed. And this is very useful because it helps in avoiding violations of our norms, especially in very risky situations, like this morning was told by Lucilla Scioli from the European government, that they actually are now constructing regulations that may help people to govern those high-risk systems which might have an impact on our lives. But also the systems can be analyzed in function of how they benefit the society and who actually gets benefits from them. Okay, and in that sense, it's fine, but this is mostly about AI systems that we know already. It's very difficult to make rules and regulations about systems which are still under development. What you see now being used in reality are systems which have been investigated in the last 30 years. So if you think about what people are investigating now, what will happen in the next 30 years if the systems are going to be used for applications in our society? And this is very difficult to regulate because you don't know what the systems actually are going to do and where they're going to have an impact. And this comes down to this Collingridge dilemma, where you have this double-blind problem of the information that you're missing. So you don't know what the systems will do unless they're completely developed and used. And you have this power problem once they are used in society, like for instance, Facebook is used in society, it's very difficult to start regulating it. And so we need maybe systems, a dynamical systems approach to understand this kind of problems. But I will not talk about that today. I will talk about something more closer to home, which is people designing and building AI systems or doing research in AI systems. They might need to reconsider how we are developing our AI systems, how we are designing our algorithms, and what kind of information we use in our AI system. So the question could be, is this rational AI paradigm, is this the most suitable one? It's been suitable until now, but maybe there's something missing there that we need to add in order to make it more aligned with what we think society could benefit from. So how should it should know about our preferences and our societal preferences and our norms when it starts to autonomously act in an environment. And if this AI can sense this kind of information and can deal with that, it might also maybe be helpful to resolve some of our bigger societal problems. And like this morning also said by our Prime Minister, it's about augmentation of intelligence. Maybe it can be used to augment our pro-social behavior. So that's what I'm calling pro-social AI. And of course, this term can be debated, but it's just a label that I put for the moment on this kind of topic. So one thing that's important and that people have known also for a while is that if you want to take into account human norms and values, then you have to take into account human irrationality. And so this is very important. And there's some very nice references that you can find in literature about this problem of human irrationality, like the book The Righteous Mind, which makes a very nice metaphor of the elephant and its rider, where the elephant is this huge animal that actually follows the intuition. And our reason is not guiding the elephant, it's the elephant that is guiding the rider, and the rider is just explaining what the elephant actually is doing by reasoning about that. So it's first intuition and then reasoning that actually is going on. And there's also some nice work done with chimpanzees showing that if chimpanzees play games that we use for in economical settings, like the ultimatum game, that chimpanzees seem to act more rational than humans actually are acting. And this is also very well known in behavioral economics. So one classic example is the centipede game, like I'm showing here. So this centipede game is a game with two players, and they both can take two actions. They can say, I'm going to push forward a pot of money, or I'm going to take and split the pot of money according to some rules. And the rules are specified here on this figure. So you see that the first player is the green player, and he decides to push or take. But if the green player takes, and you compare it with the next step, it will always be an equal split. Half is going to the green player, half is going to the orange player. But if the green player pushes forward the money to the orange player will always take 3 more for him or herself than the green player gets, right? So the question becomes, what should you do in this kind of situation? And then if you look at this in a rational manner, we start looking at systems like backward induction. So you say, look at the end of the game, and you see there is the orange player that is deciding, and the orange player sees, okay, if I push forward the money, then it will be split equally 50-50 between the both of us. But if I take now, then I get 6 instead of 5. So what is the rational thing to do here? It's to take the money. But the green player in the step forward, since he's completely rational and knows everything about this game and the world and what the other player knows, will see, okay, if I push forward the money, then the yellow one, if he's rational, will take the money and I only get 3. So if I take the money now, I will get 4. So my rational choice is to take the money now. And we can keep on doing this backwards induction all the time until we reach the beginning of the game. And then the rational behavior is simply to take the money from the start, right? That's very interesting. That's what a rational agent would do when playing this kind of game. But if you look at people, and there's a lot of behavioral experiments that actually tested this, but one example is by McKelvey and Palfrey from 1992, where they tested this on student population in 3 different settings, one with 3 different groups with 2 different settings, one with a 4-move centipede game and one with a 6-move centipede game. And you see there that people do not take at the start. They wait a bit. They go almost through half of the game before they actually take the money. A similar observation can be made in another very famous game, which is called the Prison Dilemma, which we study a lot in my group. And in this game, you have 2 agents or 2 players, and these 2 players are, let's say they're 2 thieves, and they were arrested on the street with money in their hands. And they are put into 2 different places to get interrogated. And the thieves have 2 options. They can either say, the other one stole the money. And if the other one keeps quiet, then they will go free and the other one has to go to jail for a long time. Or they can both stay quiet and then they both have to serve some time, but not much. And there cannot be any, they cannot be blamed for stealing the money in some sort. Or if they both start talking, saying, the other one did it, then they both get a punishment, which is less severe than the punishment if they would get when one of them simply rats out the other one. And so this kind of configuration can be represented by, for instance, these values. So you see here that you have a row player and a column player. And the row player can decide, okay, what's my best choice to take? He looks at the column player and sees, let's assume that my column player is going to play C, which means he's going to stay quiet. He's not going to tell anybody about where we stole the money. If he or she still stays quiet, my best choice is to go for 7, because that's the higher payoff that I get from this game. But if I assume now that the column player is going for D, so he's going to tell that I stole the money, but then what should I do? My best choice is still to actually go for D, because then I still get the best payoff. And the same is true for the column player when thinking about the actions of the row player. And so what we have here is an outcome which is called the Nash equilibrium, and neither of the 2 players wants to change that or the behavior. So they both want to go for defection, because if they by themselves decide to go for cooperation, they are worse off. So this is a rational outcome of this game. If you look at data, and this is some data that was produced by a former postdoc in my lab, Lenaerts, shows that people do not go for this rational outcome. They still cooperate a bit. And you have many different papers discussing similar outcomes. There's still a degree of cooperation going on in the systems. So people are more cooperative than you actually would expect, okay? But still, even though we are more cooperative than you actually would expect, there is still these problems which require cooperation, which we seem to be very much incapable to solve. Take, for instance, the climate change neutrality discussions. People having to agree to reduce certain emissions, to reduce their impact on the environment through an agreement between many partners. Clearly, we're not succeeding in that. Otherwise, we would not have this new lawsuit starting of 60,000 Belgian peoples against the government that they're not investing enough inside to actually overcome this issue. The problem of mobility, it's of course easier for me to take my car at my door and to drive to work, because then I have full control over my transportation. But if everybody does that, we get congestions, right? So this is, again, the tragedy of the commons. Or in case of the COVID crisis, we're all experiencing at the moment, and we have a very hard time at the moment to stick to the regulations. But clearly, the less we stick to the regulations, the worse it actually gets. So again, this is a tragedy of the commons. And so maybe AI can help us in solving this kind of problems by promoting our pro-social behavior somehow. So to summarize this first part, what I would like to introduce here is an agenda for pro-social AI, which also is part of many other research groups. So I'm definitely not the only one thinking about this kind of questions. And there's actually a recent work package in a European project in which we are involved, which is called the Taylor Project, that actually is focusing on this question with many partners all throughout Europe on what kind of systems can we actually design so that to make them social or pro-social and to reach some goals. And so in general, I would say that this pro-social agenda would be to build systems that augment or support our capacity for cooperation, right? Maybe we are willing to cooperate, but maybe we are afraid to get exploited. So we need some way to overcome this threshold of fear for exploitation. But of course, these systems also have to know that we ourselves as humans are uncertain and have changing preferences and things like that. So we need to take this into account. And this AI system needs to take into account that it does not have all the information, and it might need to check back with us or with society to see if it's acting in the correct manner. So this means that this system needs to align itself with norms that we have in our society, and these norms can be different for different countries. Clearly, there are different norms in the different countries in Europe compared to the US or China or other countries. And if the systems become more pro-social, they might actually become systems that can assist us in solving some grand challenges like climate change discussions and things like that. And so in the second part of this talk, I'm going to give you one example on which we have been working in our lab, which is actually some of the work of Elias that I'm going to present here. And this is about an AI system that appears to overcome our social fears, right, by using that system. And so in this case, in this scenario, we again look at a game which we call a collective risk dilemma. And I'll explain this game in detail. So in this game, imagine there are 6 people entering a room and they have to play this game. And each of these people actually gets money, let's call this 40 credits, to play the game. So the 6 people and they all get money to play the game. Now, what we are asking them to do is to put money in a common pot over a number of rounds. And how do they do that? They can give nothing in a round. They can give 2 of the common pot, or they can give 4 of this common pot. Oh, sorry, of this personal account. So this means that I have 10 rounds, and I give it every of those rounds either 0, 2, or 4. Why do I do that? I'm trying to achieve a goal. Like a rational agent, I'm trying to achieve the goal of getting 120 credits into a common account. Because once I get this 100 credits into this common account, then some disaster is avoided. Like if everybody invests at regular steps into this issue of climate neutrality and resolving the CO2 emission problem, and we reach this goal, then we are happy and nothing happens. So at the end of when we reach that goal, it means that we can keep whatever was in our personal account, in this blue saving account. Okay, but if we fail, we have a risk of losing what's in the account. So this is what's happening at every round. These players are throwing some money in the pot, and if they do not reach the threshold, so they don't have 120 but they only have 116, we roll a dice, and if the dice is on the wrong side, then they lose the money. Now this game was proposed by Milinski and colleagues to actually study this question of climate change negotiations. So the idea, of course, here is that the contributing of the money is reducing at multiple rounds your CO2 emission in order to achieve some threshold. Yeah? But this can, of course, be used in many cases, example, to discuss any kind of group effort that is needed to achieve some common goal and how to coordinate this. Now, the results of that experiment were quite interesting because when they performed the experiment, and they said, okay, there's a 90% risk that if you don't reach the threshold, you're losing what's in your pockets. Still only around 55% of the groups was successful. If the probability of losing the money was only 50%, oh, I'm sorry, was so fast, only around 10% of the groups were successful. Right? So this shows interestingly, how people have a very difficult time in coordinating their actions in order to achieve a goal, even if they know very clearly how much time they have, what they need to achieve. There's a lot of anxiety, it seems, to actually achieve that goal. We repeated the same experiments in our own lab in Brussels with a number of variations on that themes, because there's also a lot of uncertainty about how much do you need to achieve, when you need to achieve this threshold. And we repeated experiments, like I said, but this was done by Elias. And what we saw was that in our setting in Brussels, we had a success around 65% on average, which is not that much different from what people saw in the Malinsky experiment. But what was interesting, what we really were aiming for, was to see how people respond in those games. How do they actually play that game? And how do they actually coordinate their actions to achieve this goal? And Elias made a nice analysis. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we saw different kinds of behaviors. We saw people that are around, that are thinking about giving fair donations at every step of the game. There are people who are compensating bad behaviors of others while playing the game. There are people trying to enforce other ones to play nice because they need to achieve this target by acting reciprocally. There are people who are very generous, who always give 4 until the threshold is reached, or even people who are very individualistic, who just only give nothing the entire time. Okay, so this made us raise the question: what happens if we now ask people to no longer play the game themselves, but we tell them, look, here are these 5 behaviors that I just listed, and you pick the behavior or the agent that is going to act on your behalf. You're going to delegate the responsibility of playing that game to an AI. Right? And just to resume again what we have, so this is what we call the delegation experiment. We told people, look, they saw on the screen, this is the game that's going to be played. They understood what the game was about and said, look, now you can choose. You have here 5 agents which can be offered by any company. And this is the behavior of all these agents. So the first one, always give 4. We explained as, okay, this agent is going to always give the maximum amount in every round until the group as a whole achieves the goal. The red agent is the agent that actually will never give anything. So independent of achieving the goal, it just doesn't give anything. The blue agent is going to give 2 on every round until the group as a whole again achieves the goal. And then we had 2 conditional agents. One that is what we call a reciprocal, which will give 0, which is the orange one, which will give 0 when in the previous round the group did not give enough. And the purple one is the compensating one, which will actually give 4 when in the previous round the group did not give enough. Okay. And I will show you the results in a second. The second experiment was a customized experiment, because we said, okay, here in the first one, we're giving people a limited set of choices. And there's maybe only one really negative one there that's always give 0. So maybe we should simply let people decide themselves how they want to program these agents. So we said, okay, let's make a programming experiment. Let's allow people to implement their agent. But of course, not everybody is versed well in programming. So let's make this simple. We give a template agent like the one I'm showing here, which simply says, I'm going to go in a loop of 10 steps for I equal to 1 to 10. And then I have to decide what I'm going to do in the first step. And then I'm going to have to decide what I'm going to do in the next steps. And the decision in the next steps can depend on what's happening in the previous step. So if I say that I take as a threshold 10, so I want that I take 10 as a threshold, then I can say, okay, if in the previous round, my group gave less than 10, I can do action AB that I show on the slide here. If they give more than 10, I can do action AA. And if they give exactly 10, then I will give action AM. And we explained this to people, and we tested their understanding, and they were allowed to play the game in that way. And then we had a third experiment, which we call the nudge experiment, which is the idea that, okay, sometimes in a hybrid society of people and agents, you might not be, you don't have a choice. You might be confronted with agents that are acting with you to coordinate some action to attain some global goal. Are we responding differently to people than to agents if we play this kind of game? And what we told them was the agents they were confronted with were agents that were successful in getting to the goal in the previous customized experiment, and we explained that in the announcement. Now, if we look at the results, it's interesting. What you see here is that if humans play by themselves, we were around 65% of success of coordinating to achieve the goal. But if they start delegating, then actually we went to almost 90% of success in the high-risk situation. So there's no communication going on. It's purely delegating to the action or decision-making to an agent. You don't make decisions yourself. You simply have the agent making decisions for you. And at the end, you still get, if you attain the goal, you still get what the agent was gathering for you in the experiment. And you see that the delegation and customization experiment actually more or less attain the same results. But as soon as we go to the nudge or hybrid experiment where you have a mixture of agents and people, it drops back to the 65%. Now, this we find very interesting. So we aim to analyze how people behave, right? And so if you look at the human experiments, this is a very rough analysis of the data we have there. So you have, in this pie chart, we see that the biggest group of, the biggest choice was a behavior of always giving 2. So people having around, on average, 2 in every round in the game. And these were flanked by very selfish people, not giving anything, or compensating people who actually picked actually were by themselves, not by picking an agent, by themselves, deciding I have to compensate bad actions of my participants, otherwise we are not going to achieve the goal. So if we move now to the first experiment with delegation, we see a shift in behavior, right? So we go to this. What we see here is that the always give 2 is still selected a lot. So people still select often this always give 2 agent, but we see a huge reduction in always give 0 behavior. It's always going from 23% to 4% in this kind of situation. We also see there's a huge boost in the more altruistic behaviors where people are always giving 4. So they pick the age that always gives 4 until the threshold is reached. Yeah? We see also that the compensating more or less remains the same, and there's an increase in reciprocal behavior, right? We can of course not say why this is because we did not ask people why did you pick this behavior explicitly, but we can of course guess that there's a difference between always giving 2 and compensate and reciprocating that we might need to explore in more detail. If we then go to the customized experiment, we again see a difference. We see a huge augmentation in the compensatory behavior. So if people code this agent themselves, we get a lot of compensating behaviors. So this is quite interesting because it shows that this compensating actually is something that they think is a good way of dealing with this problem and achieving this goal of reaching this kind of threshold. If we again see a huge reduction in this negative always give 0 behavior, and also a slight increase in always give 4 behavior. So these were the results of this experiment, but we also did a little questionnaire after the experiment. So people had to fill in a few questions before they could complete the experiment. And so one of the questions was in the delegate and the customized experiment, if we would repeat the experiment, would you want to play with an agent again? And in most cases, people were negative. They would actually prefer to play the game themselves. But what we saw was that it appears to be that in the customization experiment, when they have control about how the agent actually makes its decisions, they are much more inclined to do the same thing. Of course, this has to be confirmed by a more analysis and maybe some more in-depth social science experiments on this question. In the last experiment, the nudge experiment, what we also saw was that we asked people, okay, you were in a group with agents. We asked them, for instance, could you identify the agent? And people had a very hard time identifying who the agent was. So they could not discern among the participants who was the agent or who were the agents. But when we asked them, okay, do you think that you gave more or less than the agents? They responded almost in both cases, even when they were successful, not successful in attaining the goal. They always respond that the agents were contributing less than they were contributing. So you see in the failed groups, 80% of the people said, we have to blame the agent. It's the agent's fault that we don't reach the goal. Even though the agents were giving more or less the same amount as what the humans were doing. In the successful group, it was still close to 50% that were saying it's the agents that are actually giving less. Although, if you look at the data, it was the agents actually giving more, up to almost 10% than the humans in those experiments. So to summarize this, I hope I convinced you, or that I showed you that for certain situations, even when there is a problem of coordination or a conflict of interest in the interaction, delegation to this kind of simple agent actually makes sense. It can actually improve success. It seems to be trusted more, and people can customize the agent that they're using. And we can study now why this is actually happening. And two things already pop up to explain what actually is going on in this kind of experiments. First of all, when people play the game themselves, they can still change whatever they're doing throughout the game. They do not commit to one course of action. They simply can change it all the time when they're going through the experiments. And this also is important because they still respond emotionally. Remember the rational argument I made, the thing about the elephant and the rider. People are just responding to what other people are doing inside the game. And by picking an agent, you can no longer respond during the game emotionally to what others are doing. So what's disappearing is this fear of betrayal, right? Because you pick an agent now. But what's also clear is that there's still a lot of work to be done to actually convince people that augmentation by pro-social agents might actually be a good thing, right? Because they still say that the agents are actually the negative, the bad ones. They are giving less, and that's why we did not achieve this goal. And also, of course, it might have been related to the fact that they could not identify the agent. So maybe, like our prime minister was arguing for this morning. Maybe if we add now a transparency to the fact that these agents say, look, I'm an agent and I'm acting on your behalf or in some way, might actually improve these results. So to conclude, and I hope I'm not over time yet, Elias, I think I showed you that there's a need to look into this question of what does it mean to make pro-social AI and what will this pro-social AI do actually for us? It seems also, from this case at least, we can show that agents and AI systems are useful commitment devices. And this is important, this term commitment device, because making commitments is something that we as humans have in our genes, as a manner of speaking. It's a behavior that we do all the time. It's our law system, our society is based on the formalization of commitments to actually achieve global and large-scale collaboration. Clearly, there's still a lot of work to be done on trust, that these AI systems can actually help and give a benefit to you in the long run. And maybe as a takeaway and a point of discussion for after this session or maybe for the future is, do we really want to be more pro-social, right? Do we really accept that we are pushed to become more team players or more social in many situations where sometimes we might be tempted to think about ourselves? And with this, I would like to thank, of course, all my collaborators. These are the recent cooperators of my research, and of course, the funding agencies. And that's it for me for now. And I give the word back to Elias for the rest of the discussion. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tom, for the excellent talk. So I see that there are already some questions. For instance, Andre Peyret says that the issue, particularly with the AI, is that the regulations and rules tend to go behind the evolution of artificial intelligence systems. So in this sense, he asks whether it's possible to embed somehow these norms, these regulations that are required to keep the system pro-social in some kind of self-organized system.
Sorry, can you quickly repeat it, because I was not completely following?
Of course. So the question is if there's a way for regulations to keep up with the fast pace that AI is taken.
I think it's this is my personal opinion, so I'm just going to be clear about this. My personal opinion is that regulations will be behind because they respond to observations, right? They never, as far as I can tell, act with a clear view of the future. And it's a bit related to this College dilemma in the sense that you don't know what is the next wave. I mean, how many people would have predicted that deep learning would be the next wave of AI that's happening now? I mean, this clearly was not predicted. And it's mostly due to the fact, not because the AI was developed, it was due to the fact of the processing power and the huge amount of data that were being thrown against it that actually made this huge leap forward. So It's the technology was already there. So I think that's the main issue here. And one of my personal views on this is that modeling actually helps you, dynamical systems modeling, to understand the dynamics. And then you can say, okay, I see things happening in these dynamics. So maybe I need to regulate this or that because this is what is shown in these models. It's actually having confidence in models, just like in the COVID pandemic, having confidence in the fact that these models are making sensible predictions and actually can be used as a guideline for deciding what to do.
Yeah, and so Henry says something else here. He says, prosocial will be okay if everyone decides on which subject, theme, or values she or he will be more prosocial rather than pro-self. So I guess he's saying that if everyone, it's the alignment problem, right? If everyone is able to align on one objective, he's saying that's the only way for prosocial AI to work. Do you think that that's correct?
That's a difficult question. It's an interesting question, but it's a difficult question. Also, I would say everybody is different, right? So everybody has different concerns in their life. There's a lot of inequality, right? Also, so what is considered to be pro-social and pro-self is very context dependent. I guess now, and my collaborators are cheering because I'm saying something is context dependent. But it is the case here. I mean, it depends on who is using the system and what you're using the system for. So I think it will be very much depending on what we find important and what people find important. What is more difficult, of course, is to align with social norms in society, in my opinion, because this would be like the majority law, right? It would be like what the majority finds important might not always be what as a society we would like to move to. So these are very difficult questions. And I think I like this from the book of Stuart Russell, is that an AI system has to recognize that it does not know all the answers. And it has to recognize the uncertainty. And then it actually can go back to the user and tell him, look, I'm uncertain because of this and this reason. What do you think about that? And in this way, you would make the system immediately more trustworthy. And you would make the user also aware that there's some issues there which he or she needs to think about. So I think this interaction might be very important.
Yeah, indeed, that's interesting. There's another question from Eladio Montero. He's asking, would you say that AI is selfish because it is profitable for companies that create them? If so, what is the role of AI researchers in this case? So what should we as researchers do to avoid that companies, which for now have all the power and all the resources and data, overtake the discussion of in which direction I
think it's a bit like Luc said this morning. First of all, on responding what you're saying, is that we should maybe focus more on the development of our own systems and become less dependent on systems developed either in the US or in China. Maybe it's an important issue. Yeah, this is a critical question, and I'm not sure yet how to answer that critical question yet. So, but it's a very good question, Eladio, so you know what to do for your PhD.
So I have now another question from Alexandre Renaud. So in the last experiment that you're mentioning, what if the agents do not have a fixed decision process from the beginning, but they are actually able to learn the decision process of other agents and take adversarial decisions? So he's basically saying, what happens if agents are adaptive?
Yeah, so this is one of the research lines we're actually working on, and there's, I guess, another PhD student in this channel who will say, yes, that is my topic. So this is one of the things we're working on. And I think it's especially interesting, and it's also one of the things I would like to investigate deeper, is that if those systems are not made by ourselves, because not everybody is an AI program, but they're delivered by a company, right? Like I was saying with this alignment issue, the reason why you get the software is not maybe the same reason why you use the software, right? And this again will raise issues, and this will be discussed, need to be discussed. And I was yesterday in a very interesting seminar by some people from the Center for Human Compatible AI in Berkeley, where they made an interesting suggestion to actually regulate that. I'm not sure how much I can disclose from that, but maybe it can do it offline in a discussion about that.
Just to tie up to the question of alignment, I see another question from Jens Berger that says, in relation to the alignment issue, do you have thoughts on integrating negotiation among agents?
That's again the question, the problem. So negotiations are, of course, this is what is linked to the adaptive agents question. This again, agents can start negotiating, but they're negotiating in a sense that they're representing the human user. So again, you have to tell those agents what they can and cannot do, right? If you have an agent that's negotiation to be the winner of some kind of situation, that's different than an agent that's negotiation that everybody gets a fair outcome. So again, negotiation is another form of adaptation of your behavior inside the game that can be explored, but it has it's a two-edged sword, right? I mean, the problem is that you can have both negative and positive outcomes from that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I actually have my a question. Now this is coming from myself. So if the agents are indeed adaptive, then we start having all these issues of what norms should they follow? They need to recognize our preferences. And in fact, my question is, should AI align to our current norms? Should they always try to follow our preferences? Or should we try to develop a new normative system to interact with this AI? And in this last, and perhaps what I'm thinking is that maybe this is actually inevitable. Every time we are interacting with a new system, with a new technology, we develop new norms for this. So in this sense, should our focus as researchers be simply to guide that these human AI systems do not go towards bad normative systems and instead they stay within good normative systems? Would that be a direction for prosocial AI as well?
I think this is a difficult question again, because which norms are the good norms and which norms are the bad norms? We can, of course, think about clear examples, what they are, but this is entering more like the fictive area, the science fiction, I would say. So yeah, of course, we can imagine stuff about how we think things should go, but that's also why I put at the end this question: do we really want systems to make us more pro-social? Right? Yeah. I mean, this is a question we should ask ourselves. I mean, because it would mean that you are forced to take one for the team, right? Let's say by an AI system. Are you prepared to do that? Imagine the current COVID crisis. You are asked to follow certain regulations. We see that we are getting an increase again in the number of infected in society, which most likely is due to the fact that people are no longer sticking to working at home.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's this question, right? So imagine there's an AI system telling, no, I will block your car because you're not allowed to go to work because the norm is you have to stay at home for work. Would you accept that?
Yeah, that is very interesting. And it kind of goes back to the question of trust that you raised at the end. And you mentioned that one way to solve this is to add transparency. So I want to ask you to ask you a little bit more to elaborate a little bit more on that. So what can we do to foster trust in AI? And in this sense, coming back to what you're saying, what are the dangers if we end up in a point in which trusting AI is common ground and humans do not really think twice when accepting AI's decisions? Again, this is...
I think the trust has a lot to do with the fact that this AI reminds us of its own problems. So that it does not. So I think people will trust somebody more if this person can tell them, "Look, I am not perfect, all right? Mm-hmm. I make mistakes. So sometimes I will come back to you and ask the question: am I doing the things the way you want me to do things? Or I see an issue here which I don't know how to resolve. Can you assist me in resolving this issue?" I think my colleague Anoe has some research in that line, if I remember correctly, about this communication between a learning system and a person, which is quite interesting in going in that direction. So there is a lot of things to be done, but I don't think there's something like a perfect system. So don't expect that these systems are perfect and that they will solve our problems. They will confront us like a mirror with our own limitations and with the limitations they have ourselves. And I think this confrontation might be quite interesting, personally.
Yeah, and I particularly like what you say. So perhaps showing, if the AI shows that it's not perfect, then people will be more accepting. And this seems paradoxical because when we think about AI, we're expecting a system that is optimal, right? But in your whole talk, you're saying that actually being rational might not always be the best.
Yeah, I see some questions appearing.
Yes, there's some questions from, there's another question from Ernie Piret that says, what if AI can provide multiple viewpoints rather than only one?
That would be very cool. I think that would be very interesting to explore more deeply, because this AI would need to understand, first of all, that there is such a thing as multiple viewpoints. It also comes back to this meaning issue that was raised by Luc this morning. It has recognized that in certain phrasing, the meanings that people try to express, there is some differences that actually need to be highlighted. So I think that's a very interesting question, and it would be, I'm pretty sure somebody is thinking about this kind of question in their research lab somewhere. I mean,
yes, and there's another question from Omina Technologists. They are saying maybe it should not be black or white. Makes sense. Should we ask the degree to which the user wants to take on one for the team? So what would be the degree of prosociality that one?
Yeah, so the problem here, I thanks for that question. And the problem here again is who is deciding when somebody needs to take one for the team, right? If it's your employer that decides that you have to take one for the team, or it's your fellow employee. I mean, there's a difference in this kind of thing. So again, this is a very interesting question, and that's for me why this pro-social AI agenda is so important, because all the questions that are being raised here require some form of research, which is at least my bread and butter, is doing research on this kind of topics.
There's another decision now from someone with a very difficult name, and is asking, decisions are beneficial. Is there a risk of generalizing this process? Are there no decision-making processes in which human sensitivity is beneficial?
I fully agree. So there are probably many situations where you do not want to fully delegate decision-making. I mean, even nowadays, there are systems like for fraud detection. So systems that are checking or trying to predict when something is a fraudulent activity on your bank card or things like that. You want to have a human there in the loop to see, okay, if the system is saying that's a fraudulent activity, is this true, yes or no? Because otherwise you maybe get blacklisted or get some severe outcomes for you because of that system. So that's why I was saying in the beginning, these pro-self systems might not consider the fact that they have a societal impact. They might make your life hell because they made a choice of blacklisting you in a bank because they thought you were having some kind of malpractice on somewhere in your financials. So this is why I think that this pro-social attitude is just very important, is the fact that the system considers that there are implications to the decision that it makes, and it either, if it's not sure, or it still verifies this with either you before making a decision or with some authority before making a decision about this kind of things.
Yeah, and in the sense, there's something I missed in his question that is particularly focused on, you're saying that in this delegation system, the fear of betrayal seems to disappear, but are there some situations in which having this fear may be a good thing or may be necessary?
That's actually an interesting question. I would have to think a bit longer than I probably have the time here to come up with an example, but I can imagine there would be scenarios, right? But then you can imagine, this is also one of the things we have been thinking about, is that while your agent is playing the game, he actually couples back to the user, maybe not every round, but maybe every so many rounds, right? In order to make sure that because of the high risk of the situation it finds itself in, it actually, because it's aware of that high risk, actually couples back to a person to see if whatever he's doing makes sense or not, right?
Okay, and so in 1 minute and 2 minutes we have to conclude, so I'm just going to make a last question, if that's okay for you, Tom. One last thing about this, the whole delegation question. So you've been addressing delegation to artificial agents. Is there any fundamental difference between delegating actions to artificial agents or delegating actions to humans?
There is, of course, because especially if you look at the agents we used in this experiment, they're very rigidly defined kind of behaviors. There's no adaptation, no learning, nothing is going on. There's just like a if then else and that's it. Humans, of course, are still have their own opinion, right? So if even we do delegation all the time, right? Every employer delegates activities to an employee in the hope that the employee does the things that the employer expects the employee to do. And we see that in human interactions, there's actually a lot of often negative outcomes also in that. So there's a reduction in cooperation because of the delegation, for instance, right? Because again, the person might be even more anxious than the authority itself, because the person does not want to upset his boss or the person from whom he got the delegated action, right? And be even more restrictive on the action that he or she likes to take, right? It's like in politics, right? We delegate responsibilities to politicians, but they are afraid to do something wrong because otherwise they lose votes, right? So they're actually not maybe always going to act the way we think they should act.
Very good, Tom. I think with this we conclude. There are no more questions. Thank you very much for the excellent talk.
Thanks for having me, and thanks again, Nathaniel, for the organization.
And just as a reminder for everyone, the next section you see here, the slide is Belgian AI landscape, startups and scale-ups. Please connect to it at 1 o'clock. Bye.